Hello, everybody. I don't know if anybody's been in a religion like the LDS Church that's watching this today or is a part of it now. But I just want to sit here and say this is a very interesting church. And I grew up in it, and I didn't really realize how interesting and freaking fascinating their beliefs and their institution is. And we're going to talk about that today. First of all, let's talk about tithing. As of not that long ago, church leaders were talking about tithing as fire insurance, or simply you cannot afford to not pay tithing. Very manipulative stuff. They would even tell members that couldn't afford to eat or couldn't afford gas in their car, let the bishop handle it and pay your tithing. It's very weird to me, for especially for a church that has a Jesus that promotes self-reliance and like self-preservation, like being able to take care of yourself basically, and that goes like straight out of the window if you can't pay your tithing. It's very it's weird stuff. I want to talk about the secrecy within the organization and the fact that you must pay this 10% of your income to enter any temple of the LDS Church. The LDS Church owns a lot of land, and there are a lot of temples across the country. These temples are one of the most secretive buildings in the United States, and they are everywhere, and only a select few people are allowed to enter them. You must have a temple recommend, which includes paying 10% of your income, which also includes following the law of chastity, the word of wisdom, and I'm assuming just all the 10 commandments, stuff like that. Doesn't seem like a huge crazy criteria, right? Unless you look at every other religion ever. Let me ask you this. Go to a Catholic or Buddhist or Sikhism temple and tell me if they make you pay to enter. They don't. It's free. It's a place to worship God. Of course it doesn't cost money, yet the LDS Church's temples are wild. You look at these buildings from the outside and you think, oh, they're big on the inside. No, it is like 100 tiny rooms stacked on top of each other. It is weird, and nobody's allowed in without a special card. I used to go do baptisms for the dead, and that's honestly the most familiarity I have with the temple. I never entered that celestial room or anything like that, but I found it to be peaceful, but also not like anything I would have imagined. There's no statues of Jesus. There was no beautiful, glorious personages and symbols. It was weird. It was similar to a church, an LDS church now, where there's not much in there but places for people to sit, except all white and very like, I don't know, it was like a fancy court building, like a very fancy court building. It reminds me of a Mason temple. It was very strange. Now, all these rooms have different floors too. I only entered the main floor where there's baptisms for the dead. There's the gold bull, and I mean bull like as in a bull, held up by 5 bulls, like as in the cow. And that's where I did many baptisms for people, and it was fascinating. It was very pretty, I guess, but it was also, I don't know. I was never really the guy that was like, oh, this is so beautiful and peaceful. I was more observant and questioning. So yeah, it was a little strange. I was just like, okay, I guess I need to do this because my mama tell me, and these people were telling me, handing me names, and I just every time I felt a little pushed into there. Now, I never received, I think it's the Melchizedek priesthood. Fuck, I don't even remember. I've been out of it for so long. I don't even remember what priesthood I got. I got the basic one. And obviously that's not there anymore because I turned my back on the church. And I mean that literally. They do not like me at all. But I found it to be just very interesting that, oh, this is a paid organization, basically a paid country club, where we do rituals and stuff like that. Now, again, I haven't gone to any room above this, but I have seen some secret recordings, and I have many family members that have, and I have their personal experiences. That celestial room that I always wanted to go into, apparently it's just a white room. It's very boring from what I've been told. I'm sure it's very spiritual and peaceful just because it's all white and shiny, and that's kind of like their style. But to enter the celestial room or celestial kingdom, you must shake a man's hand through a veil, pretending to be God, and make covenants with him. Now, I really don't have an issue with this. I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, that's a cult. And I'm like, I wouldn't think so unless they weren't secretive about it. If they were secretive about it, I would say, oh yeah, that's just a church ritual. Look at every other church on the planet. They have their own weird rituals, and almost all of us can look at them and be like, that's a little weird. But since they're secretive about it, it makes it way more like, well, why are you hiding that? Why are you manipulating your members and not telling them about this when they first join the church? Why am I required to pay to get in the temple? Why are these questions that I'm not allowed to ask? Very interesting stuff. Anyway, we'll move on a little bit. But yes, the church temples are not public places for people to go. You're not allowed in the temple because you don't have a temple recommend. And if you want one, you better give away 10% of your income. Let's talk about education, because the church owns BYU and requires existential endorsements from bishops to remain enrolled. Honor code enforces behavior and ideology conformity. The church is very anti any sources that aren't church approved, any ideologies that might be as a threat to their salvation. Oh, you might convince me the church isn't real. You're going to threaten my salvation. I won't go to heaven. Ooh. They very much don't like that. So even in their own schools, they want to make sure your bishop approves of this. It's very fascinating stuff. Church members are constantly disregarded to criticize members of the church, even if the criticism is true. Everybody's seen the funny video. As well as not to look at any not a church approved sources. So if the church doesn't personally approve them and say that these are good sources for you to read, you shouldn't really be reading them. And this is much more strict when it comes to missionary training. They're only allowed to study correlated materials. Contact with outside information is very tightly controlled. They are not allowed to be on Google, as far as I'm aware. They're not allowed to be on social media or anything like that, because they could see something that would affect their missionary work in the nicest way possible. Sensitive documents and archives have been historically restricted. Church essays acknowledged controversies, but framed them through institutional perspectives. They're very bureaucratic, and they don't like the Joseph Smith letters being out. The what's the name of the post that is now a church-approved website? But Joseph Smith literally got imprisoned for trying to shut it down. Fuck, I forgot. Anyway, let's talk about this. So, the church likes to frame LDS members of the church as these victims that are more prosecuted than almost any other religion on the planet. And I mean, I was told that verbatim. They talk about how Christians just tortured them and take them out of states and stuff like that. But if I do the historical research, that doesn't add up at all, brother. There's way more marginalized communities than you. And the fact of the matter is, Joseph Smith was not imprisoned or killed because of being LDS or the leader of the LDS Church. He was imprisoned and died in prison because he was trying to shut down a newspaper organization reporting on his polygamy. He was so afraid that it would come out that he did everything in his power to try to shut them down, and he went to jail for it. Not only that, people just really didn't like polygamy and his practices with young women. It's very fascinating to me that I was taught for the entirety of my life that we are victims and that people prosecuted and tarred and feathered and arrested Joseph Smith because he was Mormon, when that just isn't true. He might have been tarred and feathered. I don't really know. but he wasn't killed because he was Mormon. He wasn't imprisoned because he was Mormon. He was imprisoned for trying to silence people's Second Amendment right. And the churches always tried to do this. They do not like things getting out about them. There's a very famous hand signal that any Orthodox LDS person will know what I'm talking about. Slit thy throat and spill thy guts before I give away the token. How fascinating is the secrecy and the lies and the deceit. I'm not the guy to sit here and be like, Joseph Smith was a pedophile and he's a piece of shit, so you just shouldn't believe in the church. And you done the DNA research, you know that the Native Americans are Israelites, right? I'm really not that guy, even though those are all true. 100% Native Americans are not Israelites. 100% Joseph Smith was sending letters to underage women, basically telling them that God demands that they have sexual intercourse with them or get sealed with him. Yeah, all of that's real, but I'm just not the guy to sit here and shove that down your throat. I don't care. I'm not here to determine whether or not Joseph Smith's church is true, because it's blatantly obvious it's not. That's a ridiculous thing to sit here and argue with. I mean, seriously, just go do your research. Go look at not church-approved websites. Go look at the Joseph Smith letters. And then go back and read the Doctrine and Covenants. This motherfucker is weird, and he totally made it all up. But I don't care. That's not what I care about. I care about people's beliefs and people's emotions and why they stay into the church and what gives them good feelings. That's what I want to focus on. I don't give a fuck about Joseph Smith. I don't give a fuck about Brigham Young. They're a bunch of weirdos. Seriously. Anyway, they've tried to hide sensitive documents, 2013 leaks. Very interesting stuff. I don't know why, other than they don't like the way that those documents portray them as. You know, let's talk about their teaching style. There's an emphasis on bearing our testimony rather than critical questioning. Questions are encouraged only if they strengthen your faith. So if you question something and it leads you away from the church, everybody's going to be around you and be like, you're getting sucked into Satan's realm. You need to be careful, buddy. You don't want to end up there because you can't come back. You need to be careful what you're talking about, what you're questioning. But if you question stuff like, oh, well, I prayed to God yesterday because I was questioning whether or not the church was true. And I had this warm, fuzzy feeling in my heart. And I just came to the conclusion that was the Holy Ghost and that the church is true. And Joseph Smith, it restored the one true church. If you say that, then they love you. Any other questioning is very much frowned upon, especially in a public setting. You shouldn't be doing that unless you talk privately with your bishop. And all your bishop is going to do is just show you the LDS website. He's not going to really like to give you his opinion on it. Media ownership. The church owns a significant amount of media outlets in Utah, including Deseret News, KSL, which reinforces institutional narratives in local culture. Our local news is KSL. We see KSL everywhere, and that is ran by the church. They literally own it. So, very interesting, especially considering KSL didn't do a good job reporting the Enzyme Peak Fund. They didn't do a good job of the 2015 scandal, and they just are a shitty news organization as a whole. Asking the wrong questions or consuming anti-Mormon sources can threaten your temple recommend status or church standing. I want you all to go watch a video called My Excommunication by Nemo the Mormon. It's freaking fascinating how this guy was excommunicated. I've never seen anybody excommunicated like that. And it was all for not paying tithing and being critical of the leaders of the church. It had nothing to do with him hating the doctrine, hating Joseph Smith, or being like, the church isn't true and everybody needs to lead away from it. It's ridiculous. This guy still believes in, I'm assuming, a good amount of Christianity. He seems very much passionate about it. And he was forced into excommunication, even though it seemed like all he wanted was good for the church. He wanted them to improve on these narratives. I hate this stuff. I mean, even me, right? Like I was excommunicated by myself. I sent in my documents, my legal request to get my documents removed from the church. But as questioning like my bishop, like I'm talking about, it's so like, but we don't criticize them. We don't talk about that. We don't promote those conversations. And to me, it's like, what the fuck? I've talked to so many Catholics that are very critical of the early days of the Catholic Church. They are very critical of the Crusades. They're critical of other Catholics that are not good Christians. But in the LDS Church, it's like, the prophet said so, and if you're questioning the prophet, you're questioning God. And it's like, what? Really? I mean, there was even a prophet that said, my stance in the church has nothing to do with revelation and relation. Why are we letting this guy shove bullshit down our throats and then be like, that's the word of God and we can't question it because the prophet has done all the thinking for us? That is a sick way of manipulation, and I don't really like it. I don't like the way my family gets treated within the church, and I hope to see a change. Anyway, this was a really fun video. Thank you all. If you want to know more information, hit me up in the comments below. I'd love to know what type of information you would like me to discuss. It's very hard to put it all in one video like this. I definitely didn't even touch on half of the stuff like the SCMC or stuff in the handbook. So let me know if you want to see that, and I love you. I'll catch you all in the next one.